Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Is it time for you to get an associate doctor? Are you sure you really need one? And if you were to get this associate, what are your expectations? And what are some of the things you'd want to ask yourself before even beginning the hiring process? And how would you want to set the practice up to ensure a successful relationship? And these are just a few of the questions we're going to discuss on this week's and next week's episode. Yes, this is a two-part series of Dental Business RX. And whether you're looking for an associate now or will be at some point in the future, I mean, even if you already have an associate, this episode is for you. I'm Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host, and I'm joined again this week by Sabri Blumberg, our Deputy Chief Operating Officer here at MGE. Now, many of you have heard Sabri before on prior episodes. As a matter of fact, the last episode she was on was 2 weeks ago, where we went over the 12 steps on how to drop managed care plans, PPO plans. And just to tell you a little bit about Sabri, if this is your first time hearing Sabri is in charge of all of the technical delivery here for clients at MGE. She's the top person we have on that, so she really knows her stuff on this. Yeah. And Sabri, I think we have you hooked up over there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to the show again.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
It's been 2 weeks.
Exactly. But the reason we're doing this together is this is something we were talking about this over the last week or so. This is something we've advised clients on since the first Clinton administration, since the 90s.
And it comes up a lot.
Yeah, it does come up a lot. And as we were constructing it, which I thought was interesting, we broke it down on three particular points. One was the questions we get asked.
Yeah.
The other is what do we tell clients?
Right.
And the third thing was how these things go wrong.
Right.
Because we'll get clients that already have had an associate or have an associate. And just as an aside, just to throw this out there, because I don't want to belabor before we get to the episode, right, or delay too much. But what are the main areas you see where an associate relationship goes wrong?
Well, there's little things that go wrong on it, right? But one of the main things is they have a wrong viewpoint when they're hiring an associate. They no longer view the associate doctor as an employee.
All right.
And therefore, the way that you would ordinarily handle an employee to make sure that employee has a successful relationship with you doesn't get applied at all. So there's no correction. There's very little supervision. There's very little talk with regards to expectations. And therefore, the associate is left to do what they think is what is needed and wanted.
I see.
And very often, that's not what's needed and wanted because the associate doesn't have any reality on what the overheads in the practice, the way that this particular practice is structured with regards to sales, diagnostic philosophy, these kinds of things, and it just creates massive problems.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the idea that, well, it's a doctor, so they should just know.
Right.
And it's true, they're more educated.
Yeah.
They have a doctorate.
Yeah.
Than their hygienist or their dental assistant, but they're still, if they're an associate doctor, they're an employee of the practice. I mean, even an owner doctor to a degree, they have that owner job, but they're also an employee of the practice in a lot of cases.
That's right. They still have to follow the policy of the practice. And if you take a look at how often do we bring in an experienced front desk staff member?
Sure. Like
a scheduler or a receptionist or even an insurance coordinator. And because they have experience in another practice, we don't assume that they know how to do that particular job in our practice.
Sure.
Right? And therefore, we train them or at least verify what they know. And there's some level of supervision, or there should be, at very least. Well, if you don't apply that same thing with an associate doctor, you're going to run into trouble.
So you see that go wrong a lot.
I see that go wrong. And where we have any other employee, if something goes off the beam or the person is no longer following policy or making up their own policy, God forbid, and things like that, we would have a conversation.
Sure.
With that staff member to make sure that they're aligned with what we're trying to get them to do. But if you don't have those conversations, there's no correction, there's no discipline, there's nothing administered on this associate. You're going to get the same thing you're going to get with any employee that you don't do these things with, and it's going to not turn out the way that you want it to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see it usually if I had to, and I've never kept metrics on this, obviously. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, I've seen what you're talking about, and you've seen probably what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
In that, I haven't talked about it yet.
Yes.
But usually where I see it is someone comes in and it's a great associate. You like them. They're looking for more of an opportunity. It depends on the doctor, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not looking for a mentorship thing. Maybe they're looking for a potential partnership.
Sure.
They're looking for a place to finally settle down.
Sure.
And the owner doctor alludes to, hey, sure, you can become a partner if things work out.
Right.
And it's not really spelled out as to what are the metrics or what are the benchmarks is the better word that have to be met in order for this person to become a partner.
Right.
So then the associate starts working, they become somewhat productive. And then after 6-8 months, the associate feels like, hey, it's time to start talking about becoming a partner. But the owner doctor isn't thinking with that.
Right.
And you have this, what was a really nice relationship before because you had two people thinking completely different. It's almost like a couple getting together and one wants to have kids and the other doesn't, but they've never talked about it.
Right.
Maybe they thought about it. And then one of them, after 6-8 months, is like, yeah, I want to have kids. And the other one say, I never want to have kids.
Right.
It's a deal breaker.
That's right.
And so you end up with it ends ugly. And it's silly because it could have been a great relationship or it could have been a no relationship from the beginning if they had known, the owner doctor was never really thinking of having a partner and just sort of said that, or maybe some nebulous idea 2 years from now.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that can go
Right.
wrong with this. And we could probably do a podcast on why associate relationships go wrong.
Well, we really actually could, but I think it boils down to, like your point and my point, clear expectations. Right, laid out in the beginning. And I really like what you do is you always insist that these expectations with regards to partnership buy-in, how much to buy in for, how that's all calculated, when, how much, right, or how that's structured is always put in writing in the contract.
It's in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
I've always liked that. And I've always followed that since I heard you say
Well,
that.
it makes sense. Then you're not going to have somebody coming at you 6 months later if it says a year.
Right.
It's in the contract.
That's right.
Because then at that point, it's an agreement.
That's right.
You're starting on the same page.
Right. And then to go back to my point with regards to being an employee, lay out clear expectations there as well. How much do I want you to produce? How do I want you to produce? How do I want your schedule structured? How do I want you to communicate with my patients? What's the minimum speed I need you to follow? Things like that.
Right. All right, good. So that's where some of where it goes wrong, folks. And like we said, we could do a whole podcast on this.
Yes.
But obviously we want to talk about how to keep it from going wrong.
Yes.
Right? So what we did is with that in mind and these other points in mind is we came up with 6 points you're going to want to address if you're looking at or the idea has popped into your head that it's time to get an associate, or if you're looking at adding another one, or you want to evaluate your current relationship. And I figured what we do, since these are the 6 points you and I laid out, right? I get to read the point normally.
Yes.
Right? And then you talk about it.
That's fine.
I do too. But so we'll just roll through them. I think we just jump into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I'll just start off with the first point.
Yes.
Right. So, which is, of these 6 points.
Yeah.
Which is, so someone talks to us and asks us, hey, should I get an associate?
Yes.
So the first thing we normally look for is, do they actually need an associate? So,
That's right.
Yeah. So what are some of the things you're looking at there?
Well, it starts with, why do they want an associate?
All right.
Right? Do they want an associate because they want to take more time off, or do they want an associate because they think they're maximized?
I see.
Right? And they can't do any more production by themselves, which is the more normal reason why somebody would ask me why they would want an associate.
Well, and also it's funny because if you take a look at that, right, are they maxed personally and they want to take more time off? So you could theoretically have somebody who's working 6 days a week and doing $50,000 a month,
Yeah.
right? Which on paper that looks like they're maxed,
Right.
but they're not really maxed.
No, they're not. And that's really where we start, is we take a look at how much are they producing versus how many operatories they have.
Right.
Right. And is that reasonable that they would be maxed at that level with the type of dentistry that they're doing?
So what are some of the things if let's take an example like
Yeah.
that. Maybe 6 days is extreme.
Yeah.
But let's say I'm working Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And I'm doing paperwork Saturday and I'm
Yeah.
stressed out. I'm doing $50,000 a month.
Yeah.
Out of a 4 operatory practice, I
Yeah.
have 1 full-time hygienist.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I need an associate doctor. I need someone to handle my emergencies, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And it's funny that you named that example because that happens more often than you think it does.
Okay.
Right. And it's actually a really good example. And they should not be maxed if they're even doing bread and butter dentistry until they're doing 80, 100 a month.
Out of those 4 chairs.
Out of
for
those
one
4
hygienist.
chairs. And they can do much, much more than that, but that would be considered the irreducible minimum acceptable level of production out of 4 operatories before I would even consider that you're maxed.
So now why would they only be doing 50 is the question.
Well, that usually comes down to scheduling problems, using chair time incorrectly. Like, for example, they have one hygienist, right? And they are using one operatory and they're scheduling vertically. They have one assistant. Those could be problems. It could be that they're only selling little pieces of the treatment plan. In other words, they're doing quadrant dentistry at best and at worst only selling the next thing.
So then now, let me unpack what you just said.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of good data in what you just said, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Just because it's one of these things, you could say it in 2 minutes.
Yes.
And it's sort of a matter of course, but this is like a big deal.
Okay.
So let's talk about the schedule issue first.
Yes.
And we did 2 episodes on scheduling a few weeks ago.
Right.
Right. So, all right. So I've got these 4 chairs.
Yes.
I have this one hygienist.
Yeah.
I'm working a lot. I'm tired.
Yes.
Okay. But I'm working with one dental assistant.
Right.
So I'm really not using my 4 chairs.
That's correct.
And you said I'm scheduling vertically. So I'm
Right.
not double booking properly, in
No.
which case I could be fitting more patients in.
That's right. So if you are not using your chair time efficiently, right? If you are not utilizing what you can do and what a hygienist or an assistant can do, and schedule that properly. And again, I'm not going to get into the scheduling here or how that should be used, right?
Sure.
What ends up happening is your schedule, there's only one way your schedule can go from there, and that is out.
Sure.
So then you have a situation where the person isn't producing what they could be producing out of that space or with their capabilities, but we have a schedule that's out 3 months.
Sure.
And so then the solution is not to hire an associate and continue that inefficiency and just pay more money
Sure.
to continue that inefficiency. The solution is to fix the schedule or fix the way that we're utilizing the chairs.
Or maybe get another assistant to fix the schedule. I mean, an assistant's going to be a lot cheaper than hiring an associate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's the first thing that we would look at.
All right. So the schedule. Now I'm going to unpack the second thing you said.
Yes.
Right. So you brought up the idea of, they're not really doing quadrant dentistry, right? Or bigger cases. So, and this is something I think that people don't necessarily think with.
Yeah.
So patient A comes in.
Yeah.
They need 4 crowns.
Yeah.
Okay, but we don't really know how to sell very well.
Right.
So we get them to accept the 1 or 2 that insurance is going to cover this year.
Right.
And then next year we get them to accept the 1 or 2 insurance is going to cover.
Right.
I've seen it like that.
Yeah.
Or we're doing 1 at a time.
Right.
As opposed to just knocking all 4 out in an appointment. And I think in some cases that there's this idea that, patients don't want to get it all done at once. Most patients just want to they want to be done.
Yeah, most patients don't want to see you that often.
Well, they just want to be done.
Yes.
Like if I could go one place and just get it over with, that would make more sense to me, right?
It would if I understood why I needed the treatment.
Exactly. So then you're taking, because once you start prepping 1 crown,
Yeah.
and if you're prepping 4 instead of 1, it's sort of like you get this, I don't know the mathematical term I'm looking for.
Doesn't matter.
But the production's somewhat exponential in
Right.
that sense because you're not having to numb them up 4 times instead of numbing them up once.
Correct.
You're not having to seat them 4 times.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what's worse, even than the numbing time, is you have to sell the rest of the treatment again.
Right.
So that takes another conversation, right? So you're adding all this time when you could have just knocked out the dentistry, which is what you're supposed to do anyway, because you're their doctor. You're supposed to get them healthy,
just get it
not
done.
healthier.
So then we've got schedule.
Yeah.
We have, are they doing full treatment plans?
Yeah.
And then this was the one you and I know we talk about this a lot and we're
Yeah.
talking about it a lot more these days.
We have to.
This was the last episode we did.
Yeah.
So let me paint another scenario for you.
Yeah.
I'm in those 4 chairs.
Yeah.
I'm doing $50,000 a month. I'm
Yeah.
working 5.5, 6 days a week, which obviously physically I am busy.
Yes.
I am present at the office a lot. I'm not seeing my family.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
And we're only doing 50 a month.
Yeah.
So one of the large culprits in this case, because this was the first thing you brought up as we were going through these questions, is they probably have a lot of PPOs.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So they have these massive write-offs. And in most cases that I see, it's not always true, but in a lot of the cases, they have more patients that they could reasonably fit on the schedule ever if they really were to reach out to their patient base and get them under care.
Right.
Right? So there's no reason for them to keep all these patients, and they're going to lose a small percentage of them if they go out of network.
Right.
But they're already losing them because they can't reasonably see them anyway.
Right. If they were to bring in an associate doctor at that point.
Yeah.
Because usually it's a combo of these three things.
Yes.
Bad scheduling, sales, and quadrant dentistry.
Right.
And they have a bunch of managed care, which, we do have a lot of international listeners.
Yes.
Right. So they don't necessarily have PPOs. I know in Europe you have a lot of government plans and stuff
Right.
like that. In some cases you're required to take them.
Right.
If you're an international listener in the U.S., we do have certain types of plans that require you, if you sign up as a preferred provider, to provide dental services at a reduced fee. Right? There you go. But so if you've got a ton of PPOs in your practice and you're busy, you're working 5-6 days a week, then you're looking at, and I'm just asking, I guess, so that you would have a client at that point start to drop some of these before they go trying to hire another provider.
Right. Because the associate, not just because, the associate is usually going to, I'm not just hiring an associate. When you hire another assistant.
Right.
Sometimes you're hiring other front desk people too. So you're taking on a lot when you're hiring an associate. So you want to make sure that overhead wise you can carry that. And why would I take on all this overhead when my biggest expense are my write-offs?
So you're just perpetuating the problem.
Yeah,
You make it
absolutely. And now on a reduced fee, I'm going to have to give a certain percentage, a large percentage of that away to the PPO and to the associate.
Right.
I'm going to end up with no money on this, but my numbers are going to look real good.
And one thing that was interesting,
Yeah.
and this just came up as we were looking at this, as we were prepping.
Yeah.
We do prep for this podcast, believe it or not. Probably could prep more, but we
Yes.
do some prepping. And we've seen this with some clients in the U.S.
Yes.
We've definitely seen it with clients in the EU.
Yeah.
And it's more requirement in the EU,
Yeah.
I think, in certain areas.
Yeah.
But with clients in the U.S., we've seen it where they'll take, maybe they've got HMOs or Medicaid or a lot of PPOs, and they'll sort of break it into two offices.
That's right.
Where they assign the associate to working the PPO patients, and they try to make the numbers work somehow.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it really does not.
No.
I know in the EU, we've had clients where I think in the EU, again, if you're listening from the EU, Sabri's from the EU, so we're somewhat credible on this. I'm not. I'm straight up an American here. But I know that one of the clients was telling us he was required
Yeah.
to have a certain amount of patients on government plans in his practice, or a certain percentage of his practice had to be
I think
government-based.
in this particular country, at least half the patients had to be, they had to accept government insurances, but only
Okay.
half the practice.
I see.
So what that person was doing is the associates would see the government insurances, and that would be half the practice, and
Sure.
then they would see the private patients, the
All right,
out
but
of network
in that
or the
case,
out
he
of
was
insurance
legally
patients.
required to do that.
Correct.
Whereas you're not legally required to do that in the United
Oh,
States
God,
normally.
no, you're not. But you bring up a problem that is a situation in the EU, but that's also a situation in the United States.
What's that?
And that is that they're seeing too many patients to be productive,
Okay.
right? So if I give a dentist 20 patients in a day, which is in the United States the traditional, insurance practice.
Sure.
We're making up for the write-offs with volume,
Right.
right? And that somehow is supposed to handle our production issues or our profitability issues. Volume does not solve profitability issues. And as a matter of fact, it makes it worse because I need more staff to handle all those patients. I can't get anything done with those patients. You don't have time to sell these patients or really educate them on what they need and get them on board with getting their treatment completed. You don't have time to you're starting, like you're numbing all these patients. It destroys your profitability. So sometimes to get the numbers where we need them to be is we slow the whole thing down.
Right.
We slow the whole practice down and get them down to, okay, start treating your patients.
Well, and then also you're going to
Fully.
end up, sorry to interrupt,
No.
but you'll end up with the doctor burning out. That's, I guess, the
Yes.
difference. If I have a store and I'm selling items off the shelf, I'm a product-based business, whereas dentistry is a service-based business.
Yeah.
If I'm a product-based business and I lower my prices and more products move off the shelves,
Yes.
all I really have to do is have a person at the register who's registering. They're there anyway.
That's right.
Maybe I could have a self-checkout.
That's right.
Well, you look, a lot of stores have done that now.
Yes.
So that doesn't really affect anything. It may affect my margin on the individual items, but it's not necessarily stressing me as the owner out more.
No.
Whereas in a dental practice, you're the one doing all the work, or
Yeah.
you're doing a majority of the actual production in the practice. You're just burning yourself out for this.
That's right.
Yeah.
In order to be profitable and really get your patients healthy and keep them coming and get them on board with buying their treatment plans and things like that, you cannot see a volume of patients a day.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
That
you have
makes
to
sense.
treat the patient you have in front of you fully.
All right, so let's say we've taken a client, we've looked at, okay, we've maximized the efficiency on their schedule, right? Which, by the way, if you would like more info on that, we did do an episode on that a couple weeks ago as a two-part episode I did. We also do, here at MGE, we do something called the Art of Scheduling Productively seminar. If you want to check it out, we do it 2 or 3 times a year. We'll put a link on the episode webpage where we teach the whole system. We also, on DDS Success, have a video that I did with Chris on called The Art of Scheduling Productively. And we also have scheduler training, but you can get the data there as well. I'll put a link on the episode webpage. So let's say we've maximized the schedule. We have got the doctor selling so that they're actually maximizing what they can do with every patient, right? And if they had a heavy amount of PPOs in the practice, we've advised them to drop them.
Yes.
Right. And they've dropped a bunch. And again, what's funny is you think you're going to lose all these patients and you don't.
Nope.
But anyway, so now the practice, the situation is cleaned up and we can kind of see what this doctor actually has.
Yes.
But at that point, we're telling them you probably don't need an associate unless
Right.
those things, right. So now.
Or let's get these things in line first, and then
Right,
let's talk
right.
about this again.
So now they've got that. We've established, let's say, we've cleaned all these things up. And we've established that, this doctor could probably use an associate. We haven't looked at how many days they need one yet necessarily.
Right.
And this is really, we noted this as a separate question. It's really sort of appends the first question,
Yes.
attaches to it, which is if they're going to get an associate,
Yeah.
right, would they be able to continue to support one productively?
Right.
So now what are the things you're looking for there?
Well, I'm looking for 3 things,
Okay.
and we can break them down. I'm looking for, do they have enough hygiene?
Okay.
Right? How far is their schedule going out right now? How many new patients are they getting? And the size of their facility.
All right. So hygiene, new patients, facility.
Yeah, and are they busy enough?
Got it.
Yeah. So
Well,
those,
right. They could have a hygienist, but they're not seeing any patients, in which case
Right.
it's kind of pointless.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's break them down.
Yes.
So with hygiene, what are you looking for?
Well, the most important thing in hygiene, and the reason why hygiene plays a role in this, is if your practice is structured correctly, most of your work, your sales, so to speak, should be coming from existing patients, which you are seeing in hygiene. You're either completing their treatment plans or you are finding new treatment on them, or suddenly they're interested in cosmetics or whatever. So a lot of your work should be coming from your hygiene chair, right, that you're pulling over to the doctor's chair. But if I have a practice that only has 4 days of hygiene and 1 doctor, there's only a certain amount of sales coming out of hygiene. And I'm going to want to expand that. And there's a formula we use for that really what we're looking at is we're looking for a certain ratio.
Like a 1-to-1, the doctor-hygienist ratio.
That's exactly right.
And usually, I've talked about, I think that in a prior episode.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
We're normally looking for a 1-to-1 ratio
Yeah.
or a 1-to-1.5.
Correct. So that means if I have 2 doctors, I'd like comfortably, I want 3 hygienists.
Right.
Minimally, I want 2
That makes sense.
hygienists.
Yeah, because otherwise you get to a point if they have 6 hygienists with 2 docs, unless they're a pedodontist,
Right.
they're going to start going nuts because they're gloving and degloving. Actually, would they glove or deglove first? Whatever. They're doing that 3 times an hour while they're trying to do the root canal.
Right. That doesn't make any
doesn't
sense
work.
either. And you
Doesn't
don't
work.
have time to do proper exams and things like that.
Right. Okay, so we want a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-1.5. And you know what's funny? Because the way we came up with this number, because we did this years ago, I don't know if you
Yes.
remember, was we had a client who had 2.5 doctors.
Yes.
And they had 1 3-day-a-week hygienist.
Right.
But the way this doctor was, they were productive.
Yes.
But the way they were surviving
Yeah.
was they were getting like 100 new patients a month.
That's right. But then the question is, why did they come to us? Because that looks great on the surface, right? They're productive. They're getting 100 new patients a month. They already have 2.5 doctors. Why would they ever come to us? Because they're going to run into profitability issues when you do that.
Because it becomes more expensive. And then
Absolutely.
they're also blowing away 50% of what could be their business at that point.
Correct,
Yeah.
which is to have all that lost income there.
Right. And they
Right.
were essentially becoming a specialist.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So hygiene, you want to make sure we've got a good hygiene to doctor ratio. Now, what are you looking for as far as new patients?
So I'm really looking at about 20 new patients per doctor.
All right. So if I'm
per
a
month.
solo practitioner, I'm seeing 30 new patients, you would want me to get up to, you'd want me to start pushing that to 40
Right.
as I get this associate.
Right, by either streamlining your marketing or really assigning somebody responsible for handling internal referrals in your office.
Got it. So because I guess a 10 new patient jump is not that bad. That's
No,
pretty
you
easy.
can usually do that by just tightening up your referral programs.
I guess the question is, I could do that concurrently, couldn't I?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. All right, so we have
Absolutely.
hygiene, new patients, and then what are you looking for with the facility?
So if I have 2 hygienists and the owner doctor's using 2 chairs and I only have 4 operatories, obviously I have a problem.
Right.
Because where's this associate going to work, right?
I don't know.
Right, exactly. Neither do I.
Somewhere else.
Right. So, or you see practices with 3 operatories that really need an associate, right? So what do? Well, if there's simply no space, you have to get creative on the hours that you could be using these chairs. In other words, so now you're splitting shifts or you're expanding hours.
Well, and can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, and before you get into that, but would you add a chair at that point possibly?
You could if you had the space to do it. It's always cleaner to keep one shift together, to go on a split shift schedule. Unless you really know what you're doing organizationally and are building it as 2 separate practices versus one practice that shares staff and things like that, where really nobody's responsible for anything because that person isn't here right now.
Do me a favor. Could you just explain the split shift a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah,
go ahead.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what a split shift is I have extended hours.
All right.
So where a normal work week would be in a dental practice 32 or 40 hours per week, now I'm open 60 hours.
All right, so I was working Monday through Thursday.
Yes.
And now you're having me work Fridays and Saturdays or maybe later into the evenings as well on Monday and Monday through Thursday.
Right. I start at 7 in the morning. I end at 7 at night. I do that 5 days a week. And on Saturdays, I work from, 9 to 2.
And as the owner doctor, am I working those 60 hours?
If you are, I'd feel very sad for you.
Well, what would happen?
So what you would do is, you would have 2 separate shifts where one practice or one shift would work from 7 in the morning till 2 and the other one would work from 2 to 7. You would have to figure that out. Like, how do we divide these hours so that it makes sense?
I see.
Right.
That's more of an individualized thing, I assume.
Correct. Where I see split shifts go wrong is where we have personnel. And it's not as critical with the assistants as it is with your front desk personnel.
All right.
Right. So your front desk personnel hold very specific functions that have very specific statistics that they are responsible for. For example, the scheduler is responsible for the production. And your receptionist is responsible for the referrals, or, your treatment coordinator is responsible for the income, right, of the practice. But if that person isn't always there to take responsibility for it, things will go wrong. Or if different people are doing it at different days, there's nobody accountable or responsible for those statistics.
Sure.
Right? So what has to happen is it's almost like you have 2 practices that operate that occupy the same space.
Yeah, I mean, you're paying rent on the space, assuming the facility is usable.
Right.
Every day, 24 hours a day.
That's right. So you could have 2 practices there.
Right.
So your 2 shifts are really 2 different practices with individual statistics, individual staffs, things like that. So
And I've seen us when we have, where I've seen a few clients do this normally, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. It's usually, let's say they're in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And the space is at a premium.
Yeah.
Getting a build out is a nightmare.
Yeah.
So they just, they can't blow into the next suite because there's someone else there.
that's right.
Yeah. I mean, usually this isn't as big of a problem, I guess, in a rural practice or a practice here in, St. Petersburg.
No, you can usually find more space that you can annex.
Right.
So that's really usually not a problem. But in those scenarios, that is a problem where they simply cannot get more space. So splitting shifts is a viable option, but it's usually my last option because you have to manage 2 separate practices and you really have to know what you're doing if you're going to do that productively. So there's usually a lot of legwork that has to happen to do that successfully.
That makes sense.
But you can do it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So to sum up, this is kind of the continuation. It's really question 2, but it's a continuation of question 1.
Yeah.
Would they be able to support them? So you're looking for a 1 to 1.5 doctor hygiene ratio. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we kind of see where we're at so far,
Yeah.
They've most likely dumped their low reimbursing PPOs. They have that 1 to 1.5 ratio, and it's good. They are getting 20 new patients per provider, or if I'm getting 30 by myself, we can obviously add 10 new patients a month as I hire this associate without a big problem, right? And one thing I wanted to mention too, and then I'll remember. And then we have enough chairs to fit this associate, ideally without having to split shifts. But if that's the case, it is a specialized thing. I've seen you walk somebody through it, and it's not a quick little walk in the park.
No, it's not.
It's cool when it works.
When it works, it's fantastic.
Right. But it's not a walk in the park.
No.
And one thing I wanted to mention, this is the thing I want to mention, is and we've done this with docs and associates before, and this is actually very timely now, especially with the hygiene shortage.
Yes.
A lot of people looking for hygienists,
Yes.
right? Is one thing you can do and we haven't gotten into how to find the associate and stuff yet, which we'll talk about. But let's say we're bringing that associate in and we want to maintain this doc hygiene ratio.
Yeah.
And I only really need an associate, let's say, for 2 days a week.
Right.
Really, that's what I need.
Yeah.
I could bring the associate in,
Yeah.
and they're doing 2 days a week of hygiene,
Yeah.
and 2 days a week of doctoring,
Yes.
right? So they're on a 4-day week like I am.
Yeah.
And essentially, if I have a doctor doing 2 days a week of hygiene,
Yeah.
and 2 doctor days, and I'm doing 4 doctor days, and I have a hygienist doing 4 doctor days, I have 6 days of each. I'm
Yes.
maintaining that 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
And as that associate doctor starts to get busier with doctoring, I bring in more hygienists.
That's right. So that's a really comfortable way to do it. And I've seen that done successfully. I've seen you do that
Yeah,
successfully
it's very successful.
numerous times.
Yeah.
Right? Where I see that messed up
Yeah.
is where the owner doctor also starts taking hygiene because the associate doesn't want to do
How would
hygiene.
that be? I would know.
I know.
I haven't had that happen to me yet.
I have had that happen numerous times where I'm going, no.
Are they showing solidarity with the associate?
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to remember it's your practice.
Right.
Right. I know. And certain associates are not going to want to do hygiene ever, right? And can't get the concept or are not on board with the concept that this is a stepping stone to working in a fee for service or private practice versus a practice that is more insurance driven, where they're going to have the volume and the management that comes along with that, which maybe isn't the best way to practice for them.
That makes
Right.
sense.
So if you want to practice on a private level, sometimes this is what you have to do. I mean, take a look at what the owner had to do to get this practice.
That's true.
Right. And the risk they took and the stress they went through.
Right.
So you don't just give it away.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, good. So I think we're at the point where we're good to end for this week because I think we've blown away our 30 minutes or less.
We usually do.
Yeah, that's fine. And you know what? I don't mind. It's
No.
fun. All right, good. So what we'll do is this is a 2-part series, rather, as I mentioned earlier. I'm getting into these 2-parters now. So we'll end off here. Now, when we come back for next week's episode, we're going to get into how do you use this associate? I'm just going to give them what we're going to cover here real quick.
Yeah.
How are you going to use this associate? Something you have to decide. How are you going to pay them? Finding the right person, as well as how do you onboard them and get them successful within the practice. We'll cover that in next week's episode. We're also going to discuss briefly, and this will probably end up being its own episode, the idea of bringing in a specialist.
That's right, because that's completely different.
See, I think I might be getting us in trouble by adding that.
Yeah.
Right? I know you really want to add that.
Because it's so different.
But that may be an episode in and of itself. But we're going to definitely at least touch on the subject, and we might break it off as its own thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it is a thing that's happening now.
Yeah. And I think it's smart.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Anyway, that about does it for this week, folks. Sabri, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Sure.
And they'll be hearing you next week, too.
Great, yeah.
If you want to find out more about us, you can find us online at mgeonline.com. You can also call us at 800-640-1140. The links that I brought up and mentioned are on the episode webpage at dentalbusinessrx.com or on whatever podcast platform you're using. And folks, if you want to be notified about episodes like this, don't forget to subscribe or follow us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Have a great week, and you'll hear from us next week.